Hi again then guys, and welcome to another look back into the world of Project Gotham 4 once again in particular, and this time we're looking at another one of my favourite cars in the game, but one which I wouldn't necessarily put as one of my absolute favourites, although it is up there, and in real life it's the only car in its category which I'm actually a huge fan of, because these open wheel style, road going track day, kind of old school Grand Prix cars for the road, slash lightweight sports cars for the road, you know the type, Caterhams, Westfields, Donkervorts, the light car company Rocket, all that kind of thing. I'm not a fan of those. A lot of people are. They're great cars for what they do, but I wouldn't fit in most of them for a start, but even if I did, I'm just not a fan of those super lightweight, basically toy race cars for the road. They are fantastic at what they do, they are almost untouchable for their respective power levels, but this one really does appeal to me, and I think one of the main reasons why is the choice of engine. And the choice of engine wasn't just done for the sake of turning the car in effect into a retro hot rod. It's an authentic engine, because this car is called the Vanwall GPR V12. Yeah, a V12 within that class. That is something which you do not see that often. Usually cars in this kind of category have small high-revving motorbike engines in the case of the Rocket or a Caterham, or some Caterhams at least. Then you have others which will go for maybe like a 2-litre Audi engine like the KTM Crossbow, or then something with a big American V8 like the Elfin Clubman. This one is pretty much the only car within that category to have a V12. And it has a V12 for a specific reason, because this car, strangely enough, is a replica of a car built by the same company who makes the replica, and that's something which doesn't happen that often, and when it does, it tends to be quite special, an homage to their own work. That kind of sounds pretentious, but sometimes the car does deserve it, and I would say that this one definitely does, because although many people don't talk about Vanwall as a brand, they are a significant one. They're a small British company who won the Grand Prix in 1958. Then, half a century later, they decide to make the car again, but as a road-going replica of that same vehicle. Now, of course, they had to make some changes. You have to have headlights, so it has very, very tiny ones at the front. You have to, of course, have it road registered with license plates, and you have to have stuff like indicators and even mudguards over the wheels. And the mudguards are a very nice feature on this one because they're actually modelled in the same outline as a tyre, so the mudguards themselves actually look like tyres. That's a cool little feature, and the car itself is handmade. It's bespoke and custom to each buyer. But that is unfortunately where the story gets a little bit sad, because there is only one Vanwall, as far as I'm aware, in the world, and it's the one that's represented on the game, finished in British Racing Green, of course, and it's a car which had a proposed price of about 50 grand. Now that doesn't sound too bad, but the problem is this was before vehicles like the KTM Crossbow, and before people on the market were more acceptant of cars like this costing that much. Because let's face it, a Caterham doesn't usually cost 50 grand, and if you're going to go for this kind of driving experience, you will get a lot of what this car offers from a Caterham. Plus, you then have the big disadvantage that this car is only a single-seater, and as cool as that is, to have this massive V12 engine basically with a seat attached to it, it's not very practical, and even many sports car owners do want to take a passenger, and you cannot do that in this car. I mean, even a light car company Rocket can have a passenger, but this one can't. Even a Caparo T1 can, but this one can't. That's unfortunate. But at the same time, I like it because it's authentic to the car. Plus the shape itself is totally unique within the class. There are some which are vaguely similar, like the Brook RR, but even that doesn't really look that similar once you put it next to the car. Now the engine in this one is a Jaguar V12, big capacity, either a 5.3 or a 6-litre, producing in excess of 350 horsepower, so performance is pretty good. I believe, if I remember correctly, the 0 to 60 time was quoted at something like 4.5 seconds, which might not be as quick as you'd assume, but you have to bear in mind, of course, that this isn't designed to be super lightweight. It has a big engine. It's a lot heavier than many of its rivals, especially something like a Caterham or a Rocket. That being said, it's not even from the same kind of era, because the car is technically newer than many of those, but it's a deliberately retro vehicle. It's very old-fashioned, the handling is very old-fashioned, it comes from the era of huge engines and skinny tyres, whereas these days it's the exact opposite. The Grand Prix has huge tyres and skinny engines, and I love that. Cars that were driven basically with the throttle. But that is the ironic thing about the Vanwall, at least in the world of Project Gotham, because they give this car in the game a drift rating of 9 out of 10, which sounds fantastic, or awful, depending on how you look at it, because it could be, you know, just a slippery old Grand Prix style machine which can't take a corner. But that's the weird thing, because of all of the ratings that they give this car, I disagree with that one the most, because as you can even see in this video, I'm taking corners at pretty decent speeds, and it's not drifting that much. I would disagree that this is that much of a tail-happy car, because it's not. It's actually a very good handling car. The engine placement in the front, rather than in the middle, such as something like the Rocket or a Crossbow, actually gives it totally different handling and a totally different handling signature to vehicles like that. But I would say in a pretty good way. The handling is very, you could say, stable, but more so predictable, I would say. You know what the car's going to do at all times, and it's definitely not as tail-happy as they would lead you to believe, and not as tail-happy as the car itself looks. As far as the rest of the specs go, they've given it a 5 on acceleration. That seems okay, that's about believable. The brakes, though, I disagree with. They give it a 3. That's definitely not the case. I'd give it a 4, at least. They are pretty good, they do a good job at slowing the car down. The grip, they give a 4. I might bump that up to a 5, to be honest, because, as I said, it's nowhere near as tail-happy as they would lead you to believe. And again, drift, 9 out of 10? No, not a chance. I'd give it probably a 6, maybe a 7 at the most, because it can drift, but it's just not anywhere near as tail-happy as you'd expect it to be, in the best way. And as far as top-end speed, they give it a 3. I'd say that's about accurate. Yeah, about a 3 for top-end. That's roughly the same as something like the Alfa Romeo SZ. Yeah, that's fair enough, because although it is relatively aerodynamic looking, it's still not exactly designed for today's kind of top speeds. So don't let the massive engine fool you. This is no supercar beater, for sure. The class itself shows that because it's an E-category vehicle, which, strangely enough, allows it to go up against the Cadillac 16 concept, which doesn't really seem fair to me, but there you go. Overall, this is definitely a car that's worth checking out if you're into these small, relatively lightweight, this one isn't exactly super light, but relatively lightweight track cars, and it does offer a genuinely different feel to almost anything else in that category, which is probably why I personally like it so much. But that's it for this pick overall. Of course, I'll see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.